everyone, and welcome to our video on defining and constructing social class. In this video we will think about what social class is, how relevant it currently is, how different aspects of social class are represented in the media, how it relates to how we use language and how we perceive how others use language, and how social class intersects with other aspects of identity in all of the above. As I often do, I'd like you to start with a reflection on what you already know or think about the concept of social class. Here's the reflection. Pause the video here and work through the different questions before continuing. Social class is a concept referring to how people are placed in different categories with relative status. One's position can depend on wealth, occupation or culture, and can be more or less rigid depending which school of thought we listen to. A Marxist approach to social class, named after the philosopher and political activist Karl Marx, says that there are just two classes, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Your position is based on relative power and is difficult to change except in cases of complete overthrow of the system. The bourgeoisie, what might otherwise be known as the middle class, own the means of production. The proletariat, what might also be known as the working class, work on these means of production. The proletariat sell their labour and get paid for it, but the owners have control over the profits of that labour. This is straightforward to apply to industrial societies where there are lots of factories owned by people, other people working on the machines, those workers getting a weekly or monthly wage, and the owners having control over the profits from the business. It is trickier to apply to societies whose work is based more around services, information and data, as we tend to see in the UK and Irish society today. It is still possible though, and lots of people still take a Marxist approach to class. The social stratificationist school of thought, which is based on the work of Max Weber and developed by other key people like Dennis Gilbert, views class as a number of categories positioned as a hierarchy. It is not particularly rigid, and by doing one thing or another, like gaining more education or moving into a particular type of career, for example, you can move between strata. That having been said, your current social class position has implications for your level of access to or comfort with engaging with education and particular types of work, so the picture is more complex than it might at first appear. So let's talk about me and how Marx and Weber would view my social class identity. I grew up in a council estate, though my parents bought the house in the 1980s, with parents who worked in warehouse and clerical non-managerial jobs. That would place me pretty squarely in the working class. However, I got a lot of education right up to PhD level, currently work as a lecturer with a permanent, non-precarious position and live in a private detached house. That would seem to shift me to the middle class, wouldn't it? It would in Weber's eyes, but not in Marx's. In Marx's eyes, I still work for a boss and I get a set salary rather than a direct profit for the work I do. So he would see me still as working class. So there's disagreement already, and that's before we even get into any discussions about the implications of culture and lifestyle for the definition. The level of flexibility in a social class system, or the level of flexibility we perceive in it, relates closely to our outlook on structure and agency. You'll remember we've previously explored Althusser's and Goffman's approach to identity, with Althusser considering it to be structured from outside us and Goffman considering it to be something we construct ourselves as we go along. Of course, there is always a certain amount of structure in a society. It is never a free-for-all. But it can be useful to think about where the balance is. in our own experience and in different societies. Now that we've explored definitions and constructions of social class a little bit, I want you to do another reflection. Here it is. Pause the video here and think about it before moving on. Let's introduce another theorist into the mix. Pierre Bourdieu revisits the notion of capital, which we usually relate to money or other financial assets, to include a number of what he calls forms of capital, all of which have implications for our social class position. Alongside economic capital, he places cultural capital, social capital, physical capital, and linguistic capital. Cultural capital is your knowledge of and engagement with differently valued aspects of culture. For example, your ability to converse about serious theatrical drama rather than pantomime positions you as middle class. And knowledge about rugby positions you as middle class, whereas knowledge about soccer positions you as working class. To an extent, that example I just used positions you in terms of ethnic and national identity too, doesn't it? Which is just one example of how social class intersects with other aspects of identity. Social capital is your social networks and which other networks these give you access to. For example, if you grow up in a middle class social network, you're much more likely to know or have informal access to people who are professionals in medicine, law, education, and so on, which is empowering for you. Physical capital is your appearance and your gait, or the way you carry yourself. Because children mimic those around them, Bourdieu found that social class identity actually translates into certain physical mannerisms that communicate your position in society. Think about how characters in drama, and particularly in comedy, communicate a lot about their social class identity via how they look, move, and behave, and how many stereotypes are built up from that. This form of capital also includes things like the value your clothes, accessories, and other adornments carry. Value in a symbolic sense, not in a money sense. Linguistic capital is how you speak, which is pretty much what the entire other video this week will be about. It is important to remember that capital works both ways. Or perhaps it would be more correct to say it works in a whole range of different ways and directions. It is not always the case that we will want to access the high status positions and networks. An upper middle class person may long to be one of the lads at the soccer match, but feels they can never quite be due to not having engaged with the sport when they were younger, not being in the supporters network, not quite getting the supporters' clothing choices right, and having the wrong accent. No matter what background we come from, we can find ourselves accessing things we would rather not be able to access, and not being able to access things that we long to access. As an aside, and in relation to the point I made earlier about intersections of identity, it would be interesting to explore the extent to which these identifications around rugby and soccer happen also in GAA, or whether there is less social class identity constructed around it. If you have any knowledge or experience of GAA, what do you think? I'd like you to reflect now on these questions about Bourdieu's forms of capital. Firstly, to what extent do Bourdieu's forms of capital apply to your own experience? And secondly, do you think they are becoming more or less important over time? I think Bourdieu's forms of capital are really relevant to a lot of the reality TV shows we currently see. Have you noticed how popular TV shows about people swapping places, playing a role they haven't played before, or merging two contexts have become? I'm thinking of shows like The Secret Millionaire, undercover boss, the week the landlords moved in, rich house poor house, and rich kids go skint. Bourdieu's forms of capital are a fascinating lens through which to view these shows, and by extension to reflect on what their existence and popularity tells us about our society's interest and relationships with social class. In these shows, we are watching people enter new social class contexts in which their physical, cultural, and linguistic capital is differently valued, which challenges their taken for granted experience and values. And they no longer have any social capital because they are removed from their social networks and the empowerment those provide them with. And remember, those social networks are potentially empowering regardless of whether they are in a working class or a middle class context. They're just differently empowering. The entertainment in these shows we're considering arises from the extent to which people can or cannot succeed in the new role given to them. They provide analysis of society by making people look with new eyes at things they have taken for granted. Or do they? I really enjoy these types of shows, but at the same time, we need to be mindful that they have the potential to be voyeuristic, in the sense that we watch people's private lives and acute emotions from a place of safety. We have to ask ourselves, are we only engaging with these shows for the drama they bring us, or do we actually reflect on the issues they raise? And does it matter? We are so used to engaging with stories about individuals on the media that we may forget or not even recognise in the first place the structural and societal inequalities that cause some of these individual stories. Or maybe these shows actually help us to engage with and understand these issues. What do you think? It's also worth saying that these shows remind us that lack of capital works both ways. Here's a heartwarming clip from The Secret Millionaire Changed My Life, which follows up on what happens after The Secret Millionaire. It is clear from this that Emma, the millionaire, has gained just as much as Win has through the close relationship social capital Win has brought to Emma's life, going some way to filling the gaps of lost relatives.
The moment I dreaded the most was going to tell Win about my real life, but it was also my favourite moment once it went well.
You're my greatest friend in Dagenham, and I'd like to do something for you because you mean the world to me. I think you're fantastic.
What?
That's for you.
Oh my God, I'm overwhelmed.
Come on.
It was the biggest shock of my life.
I needed a mum and I needed a granny, and thank you for that.
Well, I need another daughter, don't I? I cannot thank Emma enough because she did make my life turn round. I didn't have to get into debt for a cooker, didn't have to get in debt for a fridge, and it was lovely to go and buy myself some winter clothes without looking at the prices.
Looking forward to seeing you.
Win and I, since then, have been shopping. We've been for tea at Harrods. She's on my mobile phone, and I smile every time I see the name. It was freezing, do you remember? And I kept getting up and down to sort that fire out, because I was thinking, oh, I don't want to miss my first visitor.
It's great to see Emma again. It is really wonderful.
I'd like you to do a task now. Try to note down what some of the pros and cons are of learning about poverty, inequality and social class via shows like these versus learning about them via other genres. Next, we're going to watch a sketch from the Catherine Tate Show called Car Hire Horror, which looks comedically at the meeting of working class and upper middle class worlds. What is quite striking here is that the working class character seems quite at ease, whilst the upper middle class characters do not. In that sense, the sketch is commenting more on attitudes than anything else. Let's watch it.
And he's coming here to the house. No, that's fine. I mean, actually here. No, I'm fine. Right. Abiento, I'm afraid I've got some bad news. The Land Rover Voyager has gone in for repair.
But, Mummy, how shall we get to school?
Try not to panic.
But it's home economics today, and I'm presenting my scallops wrapped in Bavarian veal.
I'm afraid the news gets worse.
But how?
We're going to have a hire car.
Hire car? You mean a car that other people have been in?
It's being delivered by a man from the garage.
Do you mean a...
Yes, darling. A mechanic.
Morning, darling. I'm from the garage. I've got your courtesy car.
Mummy, what's he saying?
We mean you no harm.
Are you all right, love?
I'm sorry I don't understand what you're saying. Please put the keys on the floor and leave us in peace. Have mercy on us.
You what, love?
Please don't kill us.
Here, look. I'll leave it with you. You take it or leave it, all right?
There's no DVD in the back seat. And there's no bull bar on the front. What, we have to go off-road or to Highgate Village?
It's a death trap. I'll call Daddy. We'll have to cancel school for today. No run for your lives, children. We're all going to die.
The Car Hire horror sketch provides us with a humorous take on how social class-related presumptions can affect how we interact with other people. The viewers of the clip can hear clearly that all characters are speaking mutually intelligible or understandable varieties of the English language, yet the upper middle class characters, the family, claim not to be able to understand the speech of the working class character, the mechanic. This is clearly linked to their othering of working class people that we have experienced when listening to the earlier part of the sketch. This sketch is of course exaggerated for comedic effect, but comedy tends to be based on extreme versions of things that are recognisable from society, as we've learned before. We find it funny because we have experienced people making these understandability judgments falsely, or perhaps we have even made them ourselves. Do you notice the parallels between what is being commented upon in this sketch and what was being commented on in Till Death Do Us Part when we were looking at ethnicity? We're being encouraged to laugh at the people who are laughing at someone else, to critique their judgmental and out-of-touch character. I'd like you to do a reflection now about the issue that is raised by this sketch. Here it is. Again, did you notice parallels with some of what we explored in the ethnicity topic? The material about the court case, about language attitudes in schools? What we're dealing with is someone's language being perceived as something it is not. In the case of the ethnicity topic, it was the African American Vernacular English, or AAVE, being perceived as a lack of intelligence. And in this case, what we're dealing with is working class English being perceived as unintelligible or not understandable. In our next video, we'll look in more detail at the relationship between language and social class and the perceptions and attitudes that go along with that. See you in the next video.